From our 22 News Broadcast Center, this is 22 News in Focus.
Good Sunday afternoon and welcome to 22 News in Focus. I'm Laura Hutchinson. Over the past couple of weeks, it seems we've had one snowstorm after another. The plows have been out, schools and businesses have had to close a few days, and people are working to keep the snow off their roofs. We all know the snow can impact our wallets in different ways, and that's where 22 News in Focus comes in this week. Today, we're talking about the impact they have on municipalities, what happens when cities and towns go over budget, and how it impacts your home. We do have a lot to talk about today, and joining us first to discuss these recent storms and projections for the rest of the winter, we have 22 News Storm Team meteorologist Adam Strumko with us. Adam, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Laura.
So it seems like the last few weeks we have this Sunday, Monday storm that we look at, and a few storms during the week as well. We're really in the thick of winter right now. Is this pretty common to see this?
It does seem like every winter we seem to have a pattern that sets up like that. We'll get this storm that occurs, a certain time during the week, and then we see that occur over and over again for a couple weeks, that we'll get a storm on a certain day. Lately, it's been the beginning of the week, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday type of storm. And then what we've been seeing also this year is that we get a bigger storm at the beginning of the week and then a lighter one towards the middle of the week, and then we see that pattern again where we're projected to see another bigger storm as we head into the beginning of the week again. So we've been seeing that. Really, the winter started off pretty quiet, but it was once we got towards the end of January, we started to see a pattern change, and so far we just haven't had a change in that pattern. It's very consistent, and it looks like there's no immediate change anytime soon, and we may continue to see these beginning of the week storms through most of February.
It's interesting how that happens. I mean, it's like every 7 day we see the Sunday, Monday, snowfall coming. It's just interesting when you start to put that together that it's happening every week. What are you expecting from this point forward? How do you sort of gauge what type of winter this is going to be? So far, is this a bad winter compared to last winters?
Well, it's hard to say because things could change. We could see, towards the end of the month, a pattern change, and, we could be back to where we were in December, where we weren't seeing very much. In December and the beginning of January, we're relatively quiet. We didn't see a lot. And then it was towards the middle of January and through the end of January and now to the beginning of February, we've seen this pattern change. So it could change. Right now, we've seen about 30 inches of snow in Springfield. So we average about 46 inches in the Springfield area per season in a winter season. So we're not that far off. And in fact, February alone, we average about 12 inches of snow. We've already seen 10 inches of snow, and we're only a few days into the month. So, if we continue to see this, we're going to be well above normal. But again, you can have these periods where we're getting hit by these storms over and over again, and then we all of a sudden get into a very quiet period as well. So that still could happen. Right now, it does not look like that's going to happen anytime soon. It looks like we could see more snow over the next couple of weeks, and we could see significant snow. So that's going to continue to pile up, and if things go the way they are right now, then we're going to be above average. And last winter we were about average, just slightly above, I think. We had a couple big snowstorms, but typically we see those in February. If you think back in our history of New England, some of the biggest storms we talk about, the blizzard of '78, this is pretty much the anniversary date of that, the beginning of February, from the 5th through the 7th, when we saw the blizzard of '78. So some of the biggest storms, we had the blizzard of 2013 occurred the same time frame. So usually this is the time of year where we typically see some of our biggest snowstorms.
Now, since we are expecting more snow, of course, we're only at the very beginning of February now. Tell us how you actually forecast snowstorms. How are you? I know that there are different computer models that you look at. How do you determine what's going to happen to Western Mass?
Well, exactly right. We have all these different computer models, and they basically see a storm that's developing. Sometimes it's down over the south. Sometimes it's a storm that's been coming in. We've seen some of these storms coming in off the Pacific that will eventually move across the country. Some of them move from west to east right directly across. And if they move fairly quickly, we see a light to a moderate accumulation. But if we see some of these storms, these classic nor'easters that kind of dive to the south and then move up the eastern seaboard, and when they get to New England, they really intensify rapidly. We call it bombogenesis is a meteorological term for it. It's just because the storm intensifies so quickly. It's a very low pressure in the storm system. It has strong gusty winds, the northeast winds, and very heavy snowfall, which we've seen a couple of these already. So we have to watch that closely. And the models will pick up on a storm as it moves towards New England, and then we try to see what's going to take place, how the models are handling it. Sometimes these storms, they'll project them to just kind of move out to sea or move to our south. We have a certain, what we call the benchmark, where if the storm passes over that benchmark out over the ocean, then we have a better chance of seeing the storm. If it passes south of that benchmark out over the ocean, then lesser chance of seeing a significant snowfall. So those are the kinds of things we look for. And the farther south, we've been getting a lot of cold air moving in out of Canada. And when we have that in place as well, and we have these big storms, that's when we get a lot of snowfall. If some of these storms that we've been tracking, and some of them we had earlier in the season, track to our west, and that was when we get the warmer air, and we see mostly rain from those, and those don't really usually cause much of a problem because, again, we're dealing with mainly just rain. So if those storms move to our west, out over New York State or the Great Lakes, the warm air comes in, and whatever we do get falls in the form of rain. But it's when these storms move off the coast and rapidly intensify like that, that's when we're looking at some of these big snowstorms. And
quickly, before we go, explain again what the watches and the warnings are, when you'll issue one or the other.
Right. Initially, a watch will be issued. In winter, we see a winter storm watch, and that means that there is the potential for 6 inches of snow in a 12-hour period or 8 inches or more in a 24-hour period. Now, as we get closer to when the storm's going to hit, the Weather Service will either issue a winter storm warning, which means it's likely that we're going to see 6 inches of snow in a 12-hour period or 8 inches in a 24-hour period. So a significant snowfall. Yeah. Or they'll issue a winter weather advisory, which means lesser amounts of snow. You're generally between 3 and 6 inches of snow, and it may be more of a wintry mix sometimes with some sleet and freezing rain. But it shouldn't be as severe as what we would get if we had a full-blown winter storm.
Okay, 22 News Storm Team Meteorologist Adam Stremko, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. Weather impacts us so much, so we appreciate you coming on and explaining it all to us.
Anytime.
Thank you. And all this snow has placed a burden on cities and towns to keep the streets clear, but it all comes at a cost. We'll hear from a DPW director after the break. Stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Today we're talking about the impact the recent snowstorms had on our communities and have on our communities. Joining us now to talk about how these storms have affected infrastructure and the budgets of cities and towns locally, we have Chris Signoli, Director of the City of Springfield's Department of Public Works. Thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
I know it's been a busy winter for you, so I appreciate you coming on and talking to us about how this works. Talk to me about the money and how much these snowstorms cost. How do cities and towns budget snow removal?
The budget process that we have in the city really has been the same budget that we've had for probably 8 or 9 or 10 years. The budget really doesn't increase as do the other line items in the city, for the simple reason within the snow budgets we have the ability to deficit spend by law, where we don't have that ability in other departments in the city. So our budget in the city is about $1.6 million. A typical snowstorm that we've had the last 2 weeks, the one we had last week cost the city about $350,000. This one that we just had this past week was about the same. So $700,000 in 2 events, that's half of our budget right there. And the major item that we're dealing with right now is the cost of salt and materials that we're dealing with. We use $70,000 to $80,000 each of those storms just in salt.
Wow.
So our budget, we expended our budget as of about a week ago. We got approval for deficit spending from the council last week, and so we're free to move on and clean up the city.
So how does that work? Do you just continue to clean up, and then at the end of the winter we figure out how much we deficit spent and recover that? How does that work?
Yeah, we basically work with our finance department through every storm and say, okay, this is how much we spent for this storm, this is we anticipate what we're going to need, and money is placed in the account. And really it's kind of a daily process, because everybody thinks we're just doing snowstorms, but we're actually out there doing sanding and salting every night, and so we're spending a lot of time and money and effort on a daily basis to try and get that done. So we're spending money all the time. At the end of the year, we do total it up to see how much we did spend, but we're really tracking it on a daily basis as we move through the year. You know, we've had 4 or 5 major snowstorms this year, but we've had probably 15 other events where we've had to do major sanding and salting, so it's not just, you know, out there pushing snow around.
Yeah, so it almost sounds like it's safer to under budget a little bit. If you're allowed to deficit spend in this department, you're almost safer when you're budgeting. So when we hear that we're over budget, it doesn't mean something dramatic. This is actually sort of built into the game plan.
Really, and you usually see it, not just in the city of Springfield, but you start to see articles all over the place of every other town having to go through the same process. Because, you know, we could raise the budget, but obviously the overall city budget's not going to go up. It's going to come out of some other department, or whether into DPW or somebody else. And we don't have the ability to deficit spend in that line item, so we figure we keep it within this. By law, we can do it. So really monitoring as we go along and putting the budgets together for snow and sand is a difficult thing to monitor throughout the year.
And I want to ask, so how does this work? Springfield obviously has a lot of side streets and main streets.
Absolutely.
When big storms hit, like we've seen the last couple of Mondays and Sundays and Mondays, how do you disperse the plow drivers, you know, and how do you determine which streets get plowed first?
We have about 20 pieces of our own equipment, sanding and salting and plows, that we use. We have 174 pieces of equipment under contract to the city of Springfield from about 100 different vendors. At a certain point in the storm, usually when we're about 2 or 3 inches of snow on the ground, we call them in. Now, the way we have it set up, the city's split up into 20 zones. They're basically assigned to the same zone all the time, so you're dealing with anywhere between 7 and 10 pieces of equipment. We have a process of the way that we've evaluated the streets, just that you talked about, that the priority streets, the mains, get done first, and then we have a system of the way they move through the neighborhood to be as efficient as possible from a time standpoint, rather than just jumping around from street to street to street to street. We have a process that every contractor has to follow. We have an inspector in every zone that's following them around and charting their time as well, making sure that they started, you know, at whatever time they started, and then tracking them through the end of the storm as well. So everybody always says that they were the last street to be plowed in the city. Somebody's first, unfortunately, and somebody is last. And we do move it around a little bit based upon the type of storm and where we are, but really we do follow a process through each one of the neighborhoods.
So what should people do if they feel right now, you know, as we're thinking there could be more snow this week, you know,
Absolutely.
what should people do if they feel their street is not safe right now and they're nervous about getting more snow?
What they should do is always call 311. What some people do is they'll try to track down different people in City Hall, whether myself or other people, and say, hey, I got a problem. When people call 311, it gets into our computerized complaint system, and we address it. When you're calling somebody that you happen to be as a friend or something, and they start tracking people around, if somebody's out for a day, all of a sudden a complaint sits. So always call 311. It will get addressed. Our major problem right now is side streets where there is parking. We've kept our parking ban on. We've been doing ticketing and towing. We've probably, over the last 2 weeks, towed 250, 300 vehicles out of the city, probably ticketed over 1,000. And you know, the ticketing or the towing may not sound like a big number, but for every one that we tow, there's probably 5 others that all of a sudden get moved right away because they see us coming. So, and then following the storm, we try to go out and get the other side of the street. And it takes a 3 or 4 day process to be able to do that. But if residents have any complaints, whether it's regard to the snow plowing, street needs to be widened, piled snow that they can't see around, get it into the system, because that's what we are doing basically 24/7 now, is acting on those complaints, because we're working 3 shifts with our own people.
Okay, so actively working on this even after the snowstorm is done, days later.
Yes.
It is important for people to move their cars. How about clearing their own sidewalks as well? You know, it's kind of a give and take here. We expect plows to come around, but also people need to be doing some of their own
Right,
work.
and the issue that we sometimes have, not so much with the typical residential person who needs to clear sidewalks, they do. From a DPW perspective, our issue is that, you know, we obviously, unfortunately, plow in their driveways, and what we don't want them is just to take all that material and throw it back on the street. We work very, very closely with our code department and with John Delaney and his unit there with regard to private entities that plow into the street, as well as homeowners that do not plow or shovel their sidewalk. You know, we understand that it's difficult for many people after a large storm. However, what happens is that if somebody doesn't do their sidewalk and people are walking, they walk in the street. So as they're walking the street, not only is the street narrow because it's just narrow now because of the snow, they're walking in it with cars going by, and you know, it makes it even more dangerous. And when you see that during an event, nobody's walking on the sidewalk because they can't. So there's really, the danger really becomes that much of a bigger issue with us.
Yeah, it is something to keep in mind, and you always see those people snow blowing the snow back in the street.
Right.
You're just like, no.
Right.
Chris Signoli, Director of DPW in Springfield, thank you so much. I know
very
you're working
welcome.
so hard, and there's still couple more months, weeks at least left of winter. So thank you so much
Absolutely.
for all
Thank
the
you
work
very
that you
much.
do. And snowstorms can cause serious damage to your property. Next, we'll talk to a home improvement professional about keeping your property safe. Stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Welcome back to 22 News in Focus. Today we're talking about the impact of the recent snowstorms to your property and the economy. We just discussed how the weather has affected cities and towns and their efforts to clean up the streets and the cost to their budgets. The snow can also cause problems to your home and property. Here to discuss how to prevent damage from snowstorms and to keep your family safe, we have Fran Bollier of Phil Bollier & Sons Home Improvement. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Laura.
So what are we experiencing so far? We've had a lot of snowfall, and it's starting to build up on roofs right now. Many people might be wondering how much snow is too much snow for your roof. What would you say? What have you had to deal with so far?
How much snow is too much is kind of a hard thing to judge. A lot of outbuildings, like if you have an old garage or something like that, they're definitely going to be more apt for collapse. Like I don't even remember winter 2010 and 11. We lost a lot of garages, especially through Forest Park area, so a lot of older ones. If it's in question, call a professional, have them take a look at it. Usually once you get up to 2-3 feet of snow on a roof and maybe expecting some rain, you could have some difficulties. 18 inches, 2 feet, not so much to be concerned about generally.
As long as we're talking about fluffy snow, right?
You're talking about fluffy. If you're going to get some rain and now that snow acts as like a sponge, that's when it can become very dangerous.
Okay, many people worry about ice dams on their property.
Sure.
That can be really damaging. Talk to us about what ice dams are and how they form.
An ice dam is essentially the snow is melting on your roof from the heat that you're paying for. Heat rises, there's nothing you're going to do to stop that. Once it enters your attic, if it can't exhaust out quick enough through ventilation, it's going to begin to melt that snow on your roof. That melted snow is going to drip down towards the eaves and your gutter lines. As soon as it hits that exterior temperature, which is lately it's been really cold, it's going to freeze again, but that snow continues to melt. And then what happens is it creates a dam, and then you actually have ponding water on your house, on the back side of that dam, which you don't see from the ground. That water will increase its level, and once it gets high enough, it'll start to work its way under the shingle, and then, you know, God forbid it starts leaking in the house, which we've been getting a lot of calls about that.
Yeah, a lot of people experiencing leaks in the
Absolutely.
roof right now. So how do you see the signs of that before it happens, and what do you do once you have them?
If you've had problems in the past, you're probably going to have problems again this year. We've had prolonged cold, which is number one, and we've had deep snowfall. You know, we have 18 in a lot of communities, anywhere from 12 to 18 inches on the ground. So you're going to get prolonged cold, which is going to create that ice dam. So when it melts down, it's going to hit the eaves and freeze again. That is how do you prevent it is a bigger problem. You really don't want to shovel your roof. You want to snow rake your roof. If you have an ice dam going on right now and it's leaking in your house, the best thing to do is to remove the snow above the ice dam. That's all you need to do. You don't need to put salt on the dam or any of that, or hot water. We've heard all kinds of stuff, or get up there and start smashing ice. You're only going to damage your house, damage the roof, then you're going to have to deal with it in the spring. Remove the snow, thus cooling the attic, thus everything will freeze. And then your problem's solved. Within 20 minutes, you can stop an ice dam leak.
And you hear about some people putting salt and things like that.
You don't need to do that. Just remove the snow. Expose that ice dam to the exterior temperatures, and that any exposed water that's getting heated from your attic will freeze. As long as if it's above 32 degrees out, that snow is just going to drip off your house and drip to the ground. If it's below 32 degrees out, freezing, it's going to build up and freeze. So what you want to do is expose that ice dam to the exterior temperatures. It'll freeze up. and then you could deal with the underlying issue later in the spring.
Okay. Now, what about your pipes? Many people talk about keeping your pipes warm so that they don't freeze and then ultimately burst. How do you do this?
That's generally going to happen if you have a water line, definitely a hot water line. It's going to freeze quicker than cold water. If it's on exterior wall, or if it's a vulnerable spot in your basement where it's against an exterior wall and you might have a draft, you're really going to want to pay attention and insulate those. If you've had that problem in the past and maybe just fixed the pipe and didn't actually fix the situation, it might happen again, so be cautious.
So what's the best way to keep your pipes from freezing? You know, are you supposed to keep your water running?
You could keep your water dripping, absolutely. If that's a vulnerable spot, keep your water dripping at a slow pace. We'll keep the water flowing through there and keep the pressure moving.
And also, I've seen those pipe covers, so to speak. It almost looks like a sleeve that can go over the pipes. Is that something that you would recommend? Do those work well?
Oh, absolutely. That'd be more on the lines of trying to solve the problem. You know, if you have a frozen pipe now, you're going to want to shut off the water immediately. It could cause a ton of damage, and obviously call a plumber. But there's a lot of different heated cables, heated just pipe insulation, or actually, you know, trying to eliminate the draft is the biggest, what you're really going to want to try to do.
Okay, and we've had, you know, over a foot of snow, really, in most communities now. When are you supposed to remove the snow from, you know, when are we starting to be concerned about your basements leaking, basically, and your pipes and the exhaust and all of that? What should you be concerned about, and where do you want to remove the snow first?
You should be concerned about removing snow away from your foundation if we're going to get heavy rain and you already have heavy snow. So not only are you combined with what Mother Nature is giving you that day, you have your snowfall that's melting. So you're going to have huge concentrations of water up against the house. This time of year, we had prolonged cold with no snow on the ground, so we have a pretty deep frost going on right now in the ground. So when snow starts melting, it has nowhere to go. So a lot of times that's when in the early springs, if we've had a really cold winter, you're going to start getting some basement flooding. So if you could take precautions, if we get a little warm day here, try to get the snow out away from the house, create some channels that when the water does start melting, that it has a place to go and it won't filter back into your basement.
And any mistakes that you see people make this time of year that you want them to be aware of? Obviously not climbing up on a, you know, on a roof if you're not experienced
That's
with
a great
that,
question. I'm glad you asked me that. I do a lot of exterior roofing during the year. We operate 2 to 3 crews generally year round. The biggest thing is do not chop any ice. Just remove the snow. If that's basically that's the best advice I can give anyone.
Perfect.
Remove the snow.
Fran Bollier, thank you so much
Laura.
for coming
Thanks
on and
again.
talking to us. Some great advice, and I'm sure we'll check back in with you in the spring when we see all the things that went wrong this
That's right.
winter and need
Appreciate
to
it. Thank
fix our
you.
homes. Thank you. And we'll have the last word for you after the break. Stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Today we've been discussing the impact of the recent severe snowstorms on our personal property and the economy. It can certainly be a headache this time of year, but we hope you heard something today that can protect yourself from any added unnecessary stress. That is our program for today. We want to thank our guests for joining us. Thanks to you at home for watching. If you've missed any of it, you can watch it in full on our website, wwlp.com. From all of us here at 22 News, we wish you a wonderful Sunday. Take care.